Our next guest is the Second Amendment writer for Breitbart. It's Dr. AWR Hawkins. What's going on, man?
Oh, man, great to be with you.
Oh, man, it's always a pleasure, always a pleasure. So, how about the banning of Social Security recipients from owning firearms? It's fun. It's interesting. Me and my friend had a long conversation about this a few days ago. What was interesting is basically what the conversation looks like on social media and other networks with respect to this particular bill. And people are talking about, we're rolling back background checks, or we're banning background checks and things of that nature. So for the simpletons who don't understand what exactly is going on, how about we explain it to them for a quick second?
Yeah, no problem. With the Social Security with the Social Security gun ban, what that does is, if a Social Security recipient requires help with his or her finances, then they can come under investigation by the SSA, the Social Security Administration, and then lose their right to buy a gun, period. It's that plain and simple. It's a dirty trick by Obama. So to repeal that, what does that have to do with background checks? This is such a stretch.
Yeah.
To act like repealing that is the same thing as repealing background checks.
And man, the most frustrating thing that I deal with when it comes to advocacy is I think people just put I think people inherently want to be trusting of a perceived altruism. But essentially the idea that there's no way that elements in our government are blatantly out to do whatever they can to systematically limit our rights under the Second Amendment. To the point of complete restriction. They just have a really hard time wrapping their minds around that, almost to the point where it's like, well, there's no way they could possibly do that, or no way they could possibly try to do that. But yet here we have examples of it. And then not only are some people not paying attention to it, when they are paying attention to it, they've actually twisted it to make it seem as if we're trying to repeal something that's been put in place or that has nothing to do with the actual the bill in the first place. And it's incredibly frustrating me because it's like I'm constantly having to undo the false information that a lot of people have just to get the right information into their mind, just to even get to the point where we can have a decent conversation about the issue of guns in this country, which we can't have if you have false information.
Right. Well, I mean, you have false information if you read Politico, MSNBC, USA Today. I could go on and on. They all put out the story. Bloomberg. They all responded to the House vote to repeal the Social Security gun ban by saying that this would either put guns in the hands of the mentally deficient or that it was a repeal of background check. So that's just going at them constantly. And it's like, CNN. How is CNN fighting the Hearing Protection Act? By showing clips from movies to show us how dangerous suppressors are. I mean, it's funny, they're stupid. But the problem is the people that listen to them, as you're saying, they're so, I don't want to be rude to the people who are listening to them because we want to win them over if possible.
There's an ignorance.
But they're ignorant, but ignorance can be fixed with education, which is what you're doing and it's what I try to do.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's oh man, I always get frustrated when I talk about this, but it's when we think about people get on me about being so adamant about correcting people when they say things that aren't true with respect to firearms, or when we get people like certain comedians who like to utilize their platform to kind of color the image of gun owners in a negative light. And then when I jump on them for it, people are saying I'm butthurt. It's not about me being butthurt. I didn't personally take offense to anything. I don't usually. The problem is the vast majority of these people who follow these individuals don't have the requisite knowledge about firearms the way that we do. Not only that, their opinion on firearm and firearm ownership is largely swayed by the individuals they follow with these platforms. So it's our job, you and I, to counter the narrative as best that we can. Because if we sit idly by and don't say anything about it, then this is what their whole notion about firearms is going to be facilitated by people who, one, don't like them, don't know much about them, and are doing everything in their power to get rid of them.
Right. I agree. And also what you have, you're saying they don't know much about firearms. They also, because of our education system, they don't know much about natural law, natural rights, the source of freedom.
Absolutely.
If you have an understanding of Jefferson or Madison or Washington, if you have any other understanding of William Blackstone or John Locke, it's hard for the government to persuade you to give up your guns. It really is. But if the educators at all levels, but particularly in college, if they have been able to separate you from your founding fathers, then you're a sitting duck, because
Yeah.
then the only reason you would support guns is that you believe the argument of the moment instead of having the long understanding, you know.
Yep. No, absolutely. And hell, even another example of this kind of underhandedness when it comes to firearms in some political anti-gunners. We have the issue with the banning of lead in ammo, and like it's another one. It's a very insidious way to kind of go about putting in place systematic restrictions on our rights, and then we have to go through this like ball of yarn and unraveling why that's an issue. Like
Right.
remember the lead band, the green tip lead band thing?
Yeah.
You know how hard it was trying to explain to somebody who doesn't even understand what a 223 or 5.56 round is, but then
Right.
have to get them to understand and sympathize with the idea that no, if this gets banned, that essentially serves as a de facto ban, because the alternatives that we usually do have are a lot more expensive, not as readily available, and thus essentially causing supply to dry out.
Right.
And then at that point they're like, okay, so.
And the thing is, to go back to your earlier point, what they have trouble believing is that's the goal of the people that have put the ban in the first place.
Yep.
The goal is to make ammo so hard to get that when they can't pass the laws to ban guns, they make owning guns cost prohibitive so that more and more people can't afford to own them or shoot them. And what's funny is the party that usually does that, the Democrat Party, they seem to have a lock on the vote of a lot of minorities, and a lot of those minorities are poor in the big cities Democrats run. And those policies you're describing, who do they hurt?
They hurt the poor
first
people
people
in
they
those
hurt
places,
are those
yeah.
poor minorities, because they price them out of guns and they can't buy a gun for self-defense. The single mom on the south side of Chicago,
Can't.
she can't get a gun for self-defense.
Yeah.
So we've got to beat all this. We've got to
Yeah.
beat it.
I tell people all the time, like, look, because some people are like, wow, why are you going so hard on and it's just background checks and on these the common sense measures, and I'm like, first of all, you know what, you may have a leg to stand on if these things actually did anything. Let's say there was a readily identifiable proof that these laws actually pretty much lowered gun violence in this country. Actually, to the contrary, we have proof that they do absolutely nothing. So
Right.
then on top of that, you're making it harder and then more expensive to do so. So let's say, for instance, you have somebody, like you said, a mother in Southside Chicago. If I have to pay $50 every time I want to get a background check for a gun, it's nothing to me. I can do that fine. That's not a big deal to me. But somebody else who doesn't live my lifestyle is going to have a harder time doing it. And then they're probably living in an area where they don't have the security that I have in place in order to protect me before I have to get to a point where I have to use my firearm.
Right.
I'm not subject to the same type of exposure to possibly having to deal with a criminal element or a threat. But people don't think about these things. They're constantly they'll sit behind the measures that are put in place for them, and they say, well, no one needs a gun, because they're only thinking about the individual who might have a gun to come after them.
Right. No, I agree 100%. Hypocrisy first class,
Absolutely.
But I think about that. And that's why I really hated the Social Security gun ban.
Yeah.
To go back to your first point, is because you think about an 85-year-old wife who maybe loses her husband of 60 years, the trauma of learning to live alone. In that trauma, what if she needs some help under duress for a few months?
Yeah.
She needs some help doing finances. Why should she lose her Second Amendment rights for needing help?
Yeah.
I mean, they target the weak, and then they try to draw in the vote of the week at the same time. It's very, very weird.
It's not weird. It's disgusting.
Right.
and you're right. And the thing is, it's like that grandmother is that woman is probably in need of that gun more than any of us, because she's most vulnerable. And
Right.
and then they conflate the issue with the idea of they'll use words like mentally deficient or defective. Those are incredibly broad terms.
Right.
Being mentally deficient in one area does not make you prone to violence in another.
Right.
But it has that negative connotation to it. It has that, it's already instilled in us. We hear mental deficiency. Oh, this person's crazy. This person should definitely not own a gun.
Right.
And
If you read psychologists, like I know there's a great psychiatrist, from the Mayo Clinic that I believe his last name is Bostwick or Boatwick.
Yeah.
Michael was his first name. He writes on how misleading these findings of mentally deficient are. He says, usually we know someone's mentally deficient when they do something that proves it.
Exactly.
But he says up till that point, even if they have a mental imbalance, usually the only person they're harmful to is themselves. And he's not even talking about using firearms. He just means, that it doesn't even reach that level. And so he warns. He said, if we start passing laws based on this, we're going to start violating due process left and right
Yep.
because, as you say, such broad terms in play here, it's going to be hard to differentiate between, well, who is an Adam Lanza and who is the grandmother that just lost her husband of 60 years? Same term fits both of them. We can't do that.
You know what? It usually shuts them down when I bring this issue up, because people are really quick to jump on the mental health issue bandwagon when it comes to firearm and restricting people's rights. Well, I tell people all the time, you do realize generalized anxiety disorder counts as a mental illness. And once you bring that up, and considering the number of people who deal with anxiety on a regular basis, then they start to realize how broad that term really is. Right. And they're like, well, no, of course, just because you deal with anxiety from time to time doesn't mean you should be banned from owning a firearm. Well, it's considered a mental illness. So according to what you're saying, that's pretty much how that goes.
Well, it's the same thing if you look at drugs. People say, well, marijuana's legal in my state, so they don't understand. It's still a federal offense.
Yeah.
So if you're a gun owner, and you know what I'm saying, they just don't take the deeper look at things and understand. Just like the anxiety looks low level to you and I as far as an illness would go, it still reads like anything else. And if even if it's that small, you would be banned from gun ownership if we went along with this craziness.
Yep, absolutely. Well, thank you very much, man. I wish we had you on for longer. I always forget how easy it is for us to just kind of get lost in the conversation. But no, be sure to join us again, man. I look forward to having you back on.
I will, man. Thanks for having me on. Have a great day.
Absolutely. You too, man. Up next is Larry Keene from the National Shooting Sports Foundation, and we'll be back.